Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. By sharing stories of successes and triumphs, we aim to challenge the dominant narrative that often negatively portrays our disenfranchised populations. I'm your host, Charles Williams, an urban educator for more than 15 years, a current school principal in Chicago, an educational consultant, an equity advocate, and the co-host of Inside the Principal's Office. Let's get started. Hello, Cris, and welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast. For those of you listening, this is the first venture. I was just explaining this to Cris here. This is the first venture into something brand new. So we are doing both the audio and the video. So this isn't live. So if you're watching this, you are watching a recorded session. But we wanted to do something a little bit differently. So either you could listen to the show on Fridays, or you could pop over to YouTube and watch the two of us have a conversation. So this is going to be a little bit different. So I hope that you enjoy. And I don't have anything to take notes. Normally I'm jotting down notes, but I want to make sure that I am engaged here. So I'm going to have to be very, very thoughtful. And at some point, I am sure that I'm going to have to go back and watch and take down notes and things like that. But that's okay. That just means I get a double dose.
That's good.
So listeners, again, welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast. So excited to have you here. I have an amazing guest with me, a gentleman that I have spent time with in a few different places, and really happy to connect here on the show. So before I go any further, Cris, why don't you introduce yourself, talk just a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you got into education. But my favorite part is something that is interesting about who you are.
Well, I'm Cris Aldana. I'm an assistant principal. I serve as an assistant principal in Los Fresnos, Texas, at Los Fresnos High School, which is in Deep South Texas. This is my 20th year in education. I taught for 10 years, taught history, pretty much any kind of history, U.S. history, world geography. But my baby was world history. As my baby, I absolutely came to love world history. I served for 8 years here at Los Fresnos High School. I left for a couple years, was at Pflugerville, and came back. This is home for me. This has always been home, so that's a good thing. And a little bit about me: I grew up in Houston. I moved to the Rio Grande Valley when I was 16. Before heading off on my adventures, I did attend the University of Notre Dame, not too far from where you are.
Yeah.
But I came back. I kind of teaching was always something that I wanted to do. I did work for the government for about a year or so, and I was not very happy. I took up a substitute teaching position at my at Lyford CISD, which is where I graduated from, and I fell in love with education. I was like, this is where I want to be. So. Kind of moved around a little bit. I lived in, obviously, in Notre Dame. I lived in D.C. for a little bit. Studied abroad in Mexico City for about 6 months. I absolutely love that. That's my number one piece of advice to my seniors as they head off. Is you got to study abroad. Go somewhere, even if it's just for a summer or something. But I'm happy to be where I am. I currently serve as the testing coordinator, so I'm in charge of all the state testing for the school. We've got about we're an 11th, 12th grade campus, so we've got about 1,600 kids, and obviously it's exit level. So we work with our students, try to get them through so they can pass our state assessment to get them graduated.
Awesome. So I know before I jump into a few of those things, can you share something that is interesting about you? Maybe something that most people don't know, or just something you like to tell, like what makes Cris?
I'm an avid writer. I love to write. I also have a blog. I also am a political junkie. I'm just something that I'm wild about, and especially in presidential year elections. It really interests me, the little things, the nuances of things, and the way different people interact and come off. Big sports junkie as well, especially obviously college football is huge. Prefer college football over professional, but I will watch any football. Football's football. So.
Awesome. Well, being a history buff, right? I'm not surprised that politics is something that interests you, but don't worry, we are not going to get into politics here. Try to stay out of trouble with that one. But I do want to ask, when you mentioned that you love teaching history, world history, I'm curious, what is your favorite thing to teach about when it comes to world history? What is that thing that just like you love to learn about, that you love to teach about?
I kind of go back to like world religions. This is kind of like it's something that happened. We teach it to kind of towards the beginning of the course because I think out of that there's just a multitude of lessons and just and honoring those traditions. I didn't have a vast uh, and the students I taught, we didn't have a vast variety of traditions, but into introducing the traditions of those and honoring because in Houston we did have those traditions, and so I grew up with those. Like some of my best friends were Muslim and Hindu, and so like I got to interact with them, and it was just made things more rich. So I brought those things, into my class, and we learned those things, and they kind of sets a tone for how this is how we discuss the events of world history.
Hmm.
We honor traditions, and we may not completely understand or get it, but that we honor them, and same thing with our opinions. We always approach things with the attitude of scholars. We're here to study and learn from each other and with each other.
So, I think that's a perfect segue, right? You're talking about this idea of various ideas, various religions, various cultures and beliefs. And so, the heart of this show is to talk about what are some of those ways that we are challenging the narrative. And so I'm curious, in your experience, whether it was when you were a teacher or even now, what are some of those ways that you've seen that narrative being challenged in those experiences? Maybe it was something that you did in your class around religion, or something else that you've done. I'm curious.
So definitely, we look at things like, especially in my baby world history, AP world history, even more so, and we bring in
A
these
push, right?
ideas.
A
Yeah,
push.
well, ours is well, they A push is U.S. history, AP world history, or they call it WAP. They call it WAP. I don't particularly like WAP.
I don't think you could say that anymore, Chris.
It's with the
That has a
H.
whole new
It's with the
meaning.
H.
Okay. I was like, whoa, whoa, my podcast is about to get flagged.
No, so I always like AP. I've always liked AP world history. AP. We bring in documents, those primary source documents from different sources, from the merchants or those who are traveling. I think, and the way you challenge kind of the narrative a little bit is by bringing in, the documents from like Ibn Battuta or from the time of Mansa Musa, some of the things that you probably wouldn't hear about in a Western Civ course, or some of the perspectives of the Chinese, in the different dynasties, the servants, and there's not a lot of, unfortunately, there's not a lot of those documents out there because they weren't. Those documents just don't exist, and so
Mhm.
you teach the students as a world historian that you have to say what is that voice that's missing, and because it's missing, why is it missing, and then that's where the lesson comes in.
That's powerful, right? I can only imagine. Oftentimes we're brought up, and we're like you said, like in Western Civ, right? We're always hearing one side of the story, and then you start reading these documents that present a whole nother perspective, and you're like, wait a second, what are you talking about, right?
Right.
Because we only have seen it through our one lens, and so I'm curious because I know I've had my own experiences when I was a teacher with our students. Have have you ever experienced that where a student saw that different perspective and kind of applied it to their own lives or our current situations and just were like, oh wow, like I never thought about that before?
Absolutely. You get students who kind of become like really in tune to, who is it that we're not hearing from? Why? And then they take that off and say, oh, they kind of run with it, and they look and they come back. They used to come back to me in U.S. history. Hey, you know, we're looking at documents, from, let's say, uh, the antebellum period, before the
Mhm.
Civil War, and the documents that are presented, don't show the complete story. I mean, and so, and I said, well, why is that? And they're, well, because you know slaves didn't get educated. They were workhorses, and they're so there's not a lot of document. Obviously, there's some, but there's not enough to kind of make that full rounded story, come alive. And so I was like, you got to, you've got something that you can go out and research on your own.
Yeah, it's so interesting now, right? And we're having those exact conversations. Like, what happens when we teach the other side of the story, right? And some people are obviously for it and they're promoting it, while others are
Right.
saying absolutely not. I, for one, obviously am saying no. We must expose our students to the multiple perspectives, right, and the realities of the situation. It's not always so romanticized or pastoral
Right.
history. Um, so I'm curious in your experience, this idea of multiple perspective, of bringing voices in that aren't often heard. We say that a lot as educators, right? It's a staple. Like if you join any Twitter chat, that's all they
Right.
say.
Right.
So why do you think then more and more educators, or I should say there's many educators out there who are very hesitant to do that?
I think it's a little scary. I mean, we as the teacher and as educators, not that we want to be in control, but I think we've been conditioned, that when an administrator walks in the room, there
Hmm.
needs to be some kind of organization and a structure that, this happens and then this happens and then this happens. But when we open up things to student voice, that can be a little scary because we're giving over control of our classes to, hey, this is something that the kids are interested in, but it's also an opportunity to learn some rich,
Hmm.
valuable lessons. And so I think that's why people are hesitant. It's just, but in the small times, and I was kind of left the classroom at the time when this was probably just starting to kind of begin. The times that I did that, some of the things that my students produced was just amazing. We did some mini blogs for the Civil War. We did some Animoto projects. I mean, just super amazing things that they did. And I'm kind of encourage my teachers to do that now. Just it's a little scary, but the payoff is well worth it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? A powerful thing, that when we confine students to say, this is that narrative, this is that story, this is how we're going to teach and learn it, this is how you're going to show your understanding of it, you're really stifling that creativity and that knowledge. But when you step back and you open it up, and you're absolutely right, like what's going to be said? How are students going to respond? And if an administrator walks into my space and he sees, maybe an argument or a debate, right? It's like, whoa, what's going on here? Not to mention, is we're starting to see all the political connections, right?
Correct.
To say,
Correct.
whoa, you're not allowed to teach that in school. Um, but yeah, opening that up. So I'd love it if you could share. I don't know if you have any, but a story that's on the top of your mind to say this was like one of those like powerful moments when the student interjected a brand new perspective, or maybe even you were like, oh, I didn't even think about that.
So one that comes to mind is we uh, put together in my course through as a project that had been done that I'd seen done by a buddy of mine, and basically it was we're going to have peace talks for the Israel Palestine conflict, and I told him your job, you're going to be great, and I really stressed hardcore, your job is to solve this problem in the span of 90 minutes. I was like, so you have to do all your research, do all your research. We took time, send to the library, pull articles, and I was like, but your job is to solve this problem in 90 minutes.
A centuries long conflict in 90 minutes. No
Exactly.
pressure.
And
No
no
pressure.
pressure, no pressure. But that didn't really, I mean, they didn't really think about that, and so, I mean, they took it to heart, and they, at the end, I mean, obviously didn't come to a conclusion,
I was
but
going to
I
say,
say,
if they
but
did, like,
no,
what's going on?
I
No.
was like, but we go, but that was the point. And they're like, but we didn't do it. And I was like, but that was the point. Like, there's a lesson in that. And so they were like, okay, I can, start to understand that, start to understand things a little bit, more relevant to, okay, there's obviously bigger players, there's bigger issues here that you're not, you can't boil things down to just this is what the problem is. There's always an extension to, okay, well, X is happening, so that causes Y to happen, but there's also the external influence of factor Z and going from there. So they took that away from there. So I mean, that was just, I think it was something that there was success in their failure.
Hmm. That's it's a. I think you said something very powerful there. That I think oftentimes we engage in these conversations with the expectation of resolving an issue instead of going into a conversation to say, hey, I want to learn and grow as an individual, but no, I'm coming in to solve this problem. And maybe that's one of the biggest problems that we have, is that we don't engage to understand and to grow and figure things out, but we go into it to say, nope, I'm going to fix the problem. Well, if I'm trying to fix the problem and you're trying to fix the problem and we have different ideas, we're never really going to fix the problem. So that's just my big takeaway. I think I'm going to have, like, these takeaways. So so thank you for that one.
I think, I approached, when I taught history, I was blessed in that I approached things from a world history. When I taught world history, and it really influenced how I taught history. So when I came to teach U.S. history, I think there's in U.S. history there seems to be like a narrative kind of that, we start at one point and this is, we end kind of in modern. You can't really do that with world history because there's so many pockets and so many things
Yeah.
that are going on, that, like I said, those perspectives really lead to, in that one assignment, well, we've got the centuries old ideas of X, Y, and Z, and that's what's going on. So,
You know, I'm thinking this is wonderful. I,
once
we're
that
like, hey, we're recording. We're recording.
I don't know who would be calling me right now.
No, you're fine. Tell them, be like, look, I am on an important call right now.
Absolutely.
No, you're fine. What I was going to say is, I think there is this idea that we believe oftentimes, and I think because we believe in it, we perpetuate the limitations of what our students know and understand. Right? I don't think it's like, I don't know, right? I don't want to guess your age or anything, but when we were in school, we didn't have all of this information at our fingertips. Right? We were limited based either on
Yeah.
what was communicated to us by friends or family, maybe something we were watching on the news. But now students, if they have a question about something, right, you pick up your phone, hey Siri or hey Google. Now my phone's going to activate. Um, but you ask a question and boom, there it is. And so students are coming into our places with a wealth of information available to them. So it's
Right.
not necessarily our job to teach them like what to think, right? Because it's there, right? But what to do with all of that information. And so I love some of your stories here, just all of the powerful things they could do. And I also like the fact you've touched on all sorts of things, like Israel and Palestine. You talked about, like, the Muslim culture, right? And so I think another thing that we talk about oftentimes when we talk about equity and marginalized students is like Black, brown, Asian, right?
Right.
And that's it. And it's like there's so much more to that conversation. So I just wanted to touch on those because I'm glad you brought them up.
No, absolutely. I mean, and when you think about, when we moved to Central Texas, I don't want to say that we faced a lot of racism. We really didn't. But my kids, their mom is Irish Canadian and I'm Mexican American. So there's a mix there that you don't see like every day. And so they were viewed. We come from, we moved from South Texas where they are accepted as, Latinx or Latino or whatever. Moved to Central Texas, and now they're the kind of like the other, and so it was a little bit of an eye opening for them, and for better or for worse, I kind of wanted to surround them with a little bit more diversity, um, and I think they got to experience that a little bit, but they also got to experience like the not so good side of it. So
So
I mean, so obviously that, so the like the biracial or the interracial, that sometimes they get left out as well. And so I think that's kind of something that, when people talk about, some of the marginalized students or individuals, we kind of, we don't overlook them, but we forget about them sometimes.
No, you're absolutely right. I one of my keynotes that I do right now is talks about, and I'll be honest, this is probably the first time I'm talking about it. So you brought it out, Chris. Was this idea that the keynote is tales of a black man raised white, and as I go through that conversation, I struggled with the title because I said black man. I had this whole conversation with my wife. I said because I think in many ways that's how other people see me, but the reality is I'm a biracial individual, right? Irish, Scottish, English, German, that's all in my background, but those aren't things that are often considered. And so there is this struggle, like, well, how do I show up, right? Not just for myself, who am I, but how do others perceive me in the world? And so I'm glad you brought that up. And I'll be honest with you. So I only know one other family with that mixture that you just mentioned. So the Mexican Irish. So Cindy and JB, if you guys are watching, shout out to both of you guys. Cindy's
Very
in like
cool.
California, JB's out on the East Coast somewhere, but brother and sister. And I remember meeting them, and that's what she said. Yeah, I'm Mexican Irish, and I was like, that's an interesting combo. So,
Yeah, very cool.
so Chris, I have to ask, right? We're talking about this idea of the power behind giving students their voice, the idea of multiple perspectives, and maybe having those conversations that are difficult, that aren't often had within classrooms, and may be very, very challenging for people. So maybe there's a teacher, and I'm assuming that somebody's watching this or listening to this who's like, yeah, Chris, I absolutely agree, but how do I do this? How do I go about creating that safe space for my kids to have these conversations? How do I navigate them in my buildings when, especially right now, that's such a hot button topic? So, do you have any advice for teachers in kind of pushing back against that narrative of like, this is the one story that we're going to learn and teach?
So I think you have to build relationships with your students, and get to a place where where they feel safe and they feel
Mm-hmm.
and you need to feel safe. Hopefully your administration makes you feel safe as well. I think that's important as well. The other thing I would say is the pandemic opened up a lot of opportunity. There are extensions beyond the classroom. And so, if you find a student or two that, feels safe and comes to you and says, hey, I kind of want to explore, you know, my, Hindu heritage a little bit more. I'm thinking I'm a history person. Okay. Well, let's do that. And we can maybe do an assignment on the side. I don't know an assignment, but I'm just do some research on the side. Okay. Let's engage it. I want to cultivate this feeling of learning and of knowledge. I want to be able to build that in you, and empower you to understand your culture. Or if I mean, it doesn't have to be that person's culture. It could be, well, maybe I'm interested in, I don't know, I can think of, you know uh, maybe like I oversee math now, so I'm thinking quadratic equations. Maybe you got but how does that affect like architecture or things like that? Like, how can I invest in that? Can I investigate that? Can I research that? Absolutely. I mean, we got to find way, and our students are going to be interested in something,
Mm-hmm.
along the way. And so, the more we can use what's relevant to them to guide their learning, the better.
Yeah, I always tell my teachers, right, when we're looking and we're deconstructing standards, especially like now, right, we're wrapping up our first week of teacher orientation. Kids come back on Monday. Um, so when you're watching this, it'll be like last week. But anyway, um, that's one of the things we talk about. We know I say, look, it doesn't say you have to use, this textbook in order to teach this, or you don't have to
Right.
teach this subject over here. Like it's a skill, so the way you go about it, there's so many different ways, and you're absolutely right to say, well, hey, if you want to go about it this way, and if you want to go about it that way, why are we stopping them?
Right.
And I, just going back to what you said earlier, it's oftentimes it's us, it's not them.
Right. No, I think we need to kind of let go a little bit. I mean, you and I probably were in school like, this is the way it's done. This is the way it's always been done. This is the way we're going to do it. And that doesn't work. I mean, work so much for, especially like you said, our kids have, you know, knowledge at their fingertips. They've got ways. Well, and I remember the first, I mean, even back when I was first teaching world geography and introducing that to my students, they knew, hey, Pangea, and they knew that. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's like, and I was like, okay, well, we're skipping a few pages, and so I mean, that's now it's even more so. They come with opinions, and they come with their own experiences, and we've got to accept that, and we got to honor that, and we've got to use those, you know, as learning tools, as part of the learning process.
Absolutely, and something you just said right there. I maybe I'll use that as a tool to say, if you don't learn to let it go, I'm just going to start playing Frozen over and over again, and that'll get you to be like, no, 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 no more. I'm letting it go. I'm letting it go. Oh, Chris, that was awesome. So I know that the time always flies in these conversations. I glance up and I'm like, wait, what? We've been having a conversation for this long. Um, so I want to say, the people listening, people watching, whichever it may be, who want to learn a little bit more about who you are, what you do, or maybe even connect and say, hey, can you help me? Earlier, you said this, right? The pandemic changed things. And the pandemic is one of the reasons why you and I connected, right? So you've got
Absolutely.
an administrator up here in Chicago. You've got, an educator down there in Texas, so far away. But because of the pandemic, because of everybody being online all the time, we were able to connect. So I'm sure they might want to connect with you. So can you share with listeners, viewers, how can they find you?
So I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Saldaña CT. It's probably the easiest way to reach out to me. You can email me. I'll give you my email at saldanact@gmail.com. Always happy to help out, a fellow educator, extend a conversation here or there. If you have some ideas you want to share or want to collaborate, I'm always open to doing something.
Well, wonderful, Chris. And as always, as I say, I want to say thank you for being on the show. Thank you for connecting with me. I know that we have tried a few different times, so happy that we're able to finally connect. But I also want to say just thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. In the world of education, we need individuals like you who open those eyes, right, and provide opportunities for students to say these are other perspectives, but more importantly, here's your voice in this vast and open world. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you to Charles, and I really appreciated being on the show. I appreciate your time
All right. Well, I look forward to connecting with you soon, sir.
very much.